Dramatic images from Iran's southern coast have once again put the Strait of Hormuz at the center of a growing security crisis. Late-day footage shows air defense batteries lighting up the sky and the sharp report of intercepts echoing over a narrow stretch of sea where a disproportionate share of the world's oil and trade still passes. Iranian authorities say their forces detected and engaged small unmanned aerial vehicles, micro-drones and reconnaissance platforms operating close to islands in that busy channel. Officials described the engagement as successful. No explosions on the ground, no damage to infrastructure, and no casualties. The loud sounds that alarmed local residents, they said, came from defensive systems engaging the aerial targets in midair. Provincial officials in Hormozgan described the drones as conducting surveillance over a highly sensitive slice of airspace that sits alongside one of the world's most vital maritime corridors. In tense times, every flash of radar and every unidentified contact is magnified. Local state-linked outlets relayed accounts that one of the micro-drones was ultimately struck and fell into the Persian Gulf, plunging into the waters between Qashm and Hormuz. Authorities moved quickly to push back on earlier, unconfirmed social media reports that suggested an explosion on Qashm Island. They insisted the episode was a routine, decisive defensive action rather than an attack on shore installations. Taken on its own, this was a limited incident. Taken in context, it is part of a pattern that has tightened the knot of anxiety over the Gulf. In recent weeks, Iranian air defense units have reported multiple intercepts of unidentified drones, a stream of aerial probes and short-range strikes that have kept military planners, shipping companies, and energy markets on edge. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a narrow waterway, it is a strategic choke point. A closure or prolonged disruption here would ripple through global energy. Supplies, insurance costs, and the calculus of dozens of governments. That reality is why even a single micro-drone dropped into the sea can provoke a sharp tactical response and a much larger strategic conversation. Iranian officials framed the episode as proof their defensive posture is working exactly as intended. And they're telling high alert levels and rapid reactions are the right response to repeated aerial incursions, no matter how small the vehicle. For Tehran, the message has been constant. Vigilance remains high, and even the smallest aerial probe will be met with immediate response. That posture can deter some threats, but it also leaves little room for miscalculation. In a crowded air and sea space where civilian ships, patrol aircraft, private drones, and military systems share the same horizon, the margin for error is slender. Beyond the physics of an intercept, there is a political dimension. The Gulf fight line has widened and deepened since late winter. Navy commander. Essen regional capitals now describe exchanges that involve cruise missiles, aerial drones, fast attack craft, and higher-end missile systems. U.S. naval forces reported encounters that involved intercepting incoming threats and neutralizing small, fast boats. Regional authorities in the United Arab Emirates and other Gulf states recorded damage and fires aboard commercial vessels that transited the strait amid the fighting. For shipping companies, insurers, and the mariners who ply these waters, the operational picture is shifting from episodic harassment to an environment in which commercial transits require enhanced escorts, altered routes, and round-the-clock vigilance. The surge in aerial reconnaissance activity has another more insidious consequence. It normalizes layered, low-signature incursions. Micro-drones are cheap, abundant, and difficult to attribute. When dozens or hundreds of these systems are launched in a contested area, they create a fog of activity that complicates ID, notification, and decision-making. Defensive systems can and do intercept them, but every interception carries the risk of collateral damage, a misread signal, and an escalatory response. In short, the tactics of the moment favor probes that test thresholds and defenses rather than outright large-scale strikes. That makes the Gulf a laboratory for a new type of hybrid contest, one where the front line is defined as much by sensors and data as by missiles and hulls. While Tehran underlined its readiness and competence in this most recent episode, the wider region delivered another unexpected headline. Turkey unveiled what it called its first intercontinental ballistic missile during a major defense fair in Istanbul. The missile, presented under the name Yıldırım, was described by Turkish officials as a long-range system with a nominal range of roughly 6,000 kilometers. The Defense Ministry's R&D Center was credited with development, and Turkish officials said the weapon uses a liquid fuel design and is propelled by multiple rocket engines. They added that the system represents the country's longest-range missile to date and that it is intended primarily as a deterrent, though in blunt terms it will be used offensively if deemed necessary. At the exhibition, the defense minister framed the unveiling as part of a broader industrial transformation. He said the displayed systems reflect an effort to meet the needs of the Turkish armed forces through domestic research and development, and he boasted of a defense sector that has moved from importer to designer, producer, and exporter. If we have to use it, no one should doubt that we will do so without hesitation and in the most effective way, he said. That direct language was accompanied by a deliberate political signal. Ankara is signaling independent strategic reach at a moment when battlefield dynamics in the Middle East are in flux. Turkey's leap into longer-range missile technology follows years of rapid expanse, across other domains: unmanned aerial systems, cruise missiles, ground-based air defenses, and growing work in space and aviation platforms. Ankara has deployed locally made drones and other systems in conflicts from Syria to Libya and in the South Caucasus, often presenting the effort as proof that domestic platforms built to alliance standards at lower cost can shift the balance on modern battlefields. The new long-range missile is intended to extend that narrative to show that the same homegrown engineering now reaches into strategic deterrence. Viewed together, these developments underscore a wider point about the diffusion of military technology. Weapons once concentrated among a handful of global powers are spreading in capability and availability. Drones, precision-guided munitions, and longer-range missiles are now more affordable and more modular, allowing middle powers to project influence in ways that complicate traditional security architectures for regional neighbor states and global alliances alike. That diffusion poses immediate operational headaches and longer-term dilemmas about stability, escalation, and arms control. Back in the Gulf, the operational challenges are immediate. Naval commanders must balance the freedom of navigation with force protection. Commercial operators must weigh insurance premiums and rerouting costs. And political leaders must manage domestic expectations while calibrating responses that avoid a spiral into wider conflict. The noise and flash from a successful intercept are easy to interpret as sober proof of restraint. They can also be read as an advertisement for the risks inherent in a crowded, contested maritime environment. There is another subtler shift at work: the weaponization of ambiguity. Small drones and one-way systems are inherently deniable, or at the very least difficult to attribute with high confidence. That uncertainty is strategic. Actors can probe, cause disruption, or generate political leverage without to. Each crossing a clear threshold of conventional retaliation. For defenders, the challenge is to distinguish between nuisance and actionable threat, between reconnaissance and the prelude to a larger strike. Doing so requires not just sensors and interceptors, but clear rules of engagement, shared intelligence, and ideally communication channels that reduce the chance a misinterpreted contact becomes a casus belli. The Turkish announcement adds its own layer of strategic ambiguity. A nation moving toward independent, longer-range strike capability changes calculations from Ankara to capitals across Europe and the Middle East. For Turkey, a stated aim is deterrence and a claim of strategic autonomy, but for NATO partners, regional neighbors, and adversaries, the development raises questions about doctrine, control, and integration with existing alliance frameworks. How such systems will be postured, what doctrines will govern their use, and how they will be perceived by rivals are all mapped. That extend far beyond a ceremonial unveiling at a defense expo. At a human level, all of this activity the intercept, the missile tests, and the public posturing translates into uncertainty for ordinary people. Mariners worry about routes that have long been familiar. Port operators face the possibility of closures or delays. Energy markets react to perceived risk, sometimes with sudden price moves that affect consumers thousands of miles away. Diplomats face pressure to tamp down tensions without appearing weak. Military planners must prepare for contingencies in which the adversary's tactics shift faster than the defender can adapt. The pattern of recent weeks points to a sobering conclusion. Technology is both lowering the cost of confrontation and raising the speed at which incidents can cascade. Microdrones, cruise missiles, fast attack craft, and long-range conventional missiles can now be combined in ways that create rapid multi-domain crises. That speed favors those who can make decisions quickly and communicate clearly. It punishes institutions that are slow to respond or hampered by bureaucracy. It rewards clarity of purpose and the ability to manage escalation in a way that preserves strategic objectives while protecting civilians and commerce. So what does restraint look like in this environment? For militaries, it means robust detection and discriminating engagement rules to avoid overreaction. For diplomats, it means urgent work to establish back channels and incident management mechanisms that can contain fallout from misattribution and miscalculation. For the private sector, it means adaptive risk management, better situational awareness, and where possible, redundancy in supply chains that depend on vulnerable choke points. And for the rest of the world, these incidents are a reminder that global security is no longer shaped solely in capital cities and on historic battlefields. It is decided in the space between ships and islands in grooves of radar screens, and in the seconds it takes a commander to decide whether a contact is hostile. It is negotiated in trade halls and military expos, where new systems are unveiled and new doctrines debated. The Gulf and the defense fair in Istanbul became, in their separate ways, two sides of the same story this week, tactical events with strategic implications. The images from Iran's southern coast and the missile on display in Istanbul are not isolated snapshots. They are moments on trajectories that connect procurement choices, industrial policy, battlefield tactics, and diplomatic repair. They tell us that the quieter forms of probing, drones, surveillance flights, low signature incursions are increasingly central to how states test one another. They tell us that countries traditionally reliant on foreign suppliers are now investing in domestic solutions to gain strategic autonomy. And they tell us that in a world where advanced capabilities are more widely distributed, the rules that govern the past are under stress. For those watching the Strait of Hormuz, every radar blip is more than a technical reading. It is a reminder of how fragile access to the global commons can be when politics bleeds into operational space. For those watching Istanbul, every new system on a trade stand is more than an industrial achievement. It is a public demonstration of intent and a signal to neighbors and allies alike. In the end, managing this new reality will require a blend of deterrence and diplomacy, of clear rules and patient, persistent engagement. Technology will continue to change the shape of conflict, making it faster, more dispersed, and harder to attribute. But technology alone does not determine outcomes. Human judgment, the quality of institutions, the capacity to communicate under pressure, and the willingness to build guardrails around shared interests will ultimately decide whether today's encounters remain tactical incidents or become gateways to something far larger. As night fell over the Gulf, authorities tallied another successful intercept and averted a potential incident on shore. In Istanbul, delegations walked past a missile that a ministry described as a milestone in homegrown capability. Both scenes will be dissected by analysts and political leaders in the days ahead. The real question is not the flash of a radar return or the gleam of a new rocket on a display stand. It is whether the actors involved can translate deterrence into stability and public displays of strength into sustainable security for the wider region. This moment will not be the last. The waters of the Gulf will continue continue to be patrolled. Seas of commerce will continue to flow through narrow channels, and defense industries will continue to race toward longer range, faster speeds, and more autonomous systems. What matters now is the set of choices leaders make, how they manage risk, how they communicate intent, and how they seek to prevent the next probe from turning into the next